Good evening. I'm Eric Ford. I'd like to talk about leading from your strengths. And one important element of what we do as professionals is how we network. And networking is one of the tasks, activities, things that happen that we leave far too much to chance, in my opinion. Networking is something that can be done purposefully. And I think doing it purposefully is respectful of the people we're networking with. It's not Machiavellian. We're not trying to take advantage. We're not trying to gain. We're not trying to take advantage of people. We're trying to respect the value of their relationship with us. And oh, by the way, provide value back the other direction. The best networkers are the people who actually give more than they get. And there's a sort of strange phenomena where that's not possible. You can never give more than you get. The more you pump into your network's value and making it useful, the better off you will be. It just always exceeds what you're doing. And it's a very powerful aspect of our lives that we really need to think about. So I want to identify the purposes of networking, and they're many and varied. There's also something called the hidden job market, and I want to talk about that for a few minutes, because in many ways, the best jobs are the ones you're not looking for, the ones that find you. And oh, by the way, on the flip side, if you're a person hiring other people, those people, the best employees, aren't generally looking for new jobs. We'll talk about different types of networking. In the modern age, we have the internet, and we'll talk at some length about LinkedIn and Twitter, Facebook, etc. And we'll talk about some strategies, and I'll also go through what I call the fear factor. And this may be me putting forth my personal concerns about networking. I'm an introvert. I don't normally do this as a matter of course. Therefore, for me, it's something that has to be acted upon. Again, the agenda, elements of network, some strategies, and how to build your professional pitch. So I'm drawing a little bit on this last point from what I call the entrepreneurship literature. Everybody needs an elevator speech or a 3-minute version of themselves that really tells what they're about. And I think everybody in this group really needs to hone that down almost verbatim. One thing people don't realize is when you watch a TED Talk, for example, those things are all scripted to the word. And the people at TED will not let you onto the stage until you can show that you can deliver your TED Talk in the allotted 22 minutes or whatever it is. And oh, by the way, that you don't vary by more than 3 or 4 words. There is no extemporaneous speaking at a TED Talk. Similarly, I think all of us need some version of ourselves that we can pitch in 3 or 4 minutes that is pretty well honed. So what is networking? This is a matter of information sharing and making sure that the information you want to get out about yourself is getting out in a way you want it to. So this is controlling the message, as they say in politics, making sure that people are putting you in the light that you want to be put in. When I go to meetings and I hear people talk about their manager in glowing terms, that's very hopeful and that's very reinforcing. And that's a powerful tool. You want people talking positively about you, but not only positively, you want them saying the things that you want said about you. So a few quick questions. Myth or fact? Let's play a game. If you can't find a job, that proves few jobs are available. There are always jobs available. That's just the fact of the matter. Labor markets contract, labor markets expand. With that said, there's always a job available. And I'll go one further. It's possible to create jobs at other institutions or organizations that you can then fill. Myth or fact, people know how to search for jobs. I'm going to say that's a myth. Most people do not go about their job search in a way that's likely to yield the result they're hoping for. Myth or fact, there are several no-cost services available to job hunters to assist him or her, I apologize, that should be her or him, to find the right job. That is a fact. There aren't many job services currently available, and you should avail yourself of those in various ways. There are also headhunting firms and other things that you want to get connected to. Myth or fact, employers are in the driver's seat throughout the entire job search process. This is truly a myth. When you get to the point in your career, you should be looking for a job and you should be interviewing them and not the other way around. The job interview in that sense is them selling you, not the other way around. I'm an academic. I recently was asked to come interview to be department chair at an institution somewhere in the Midwest. And they didn't do a few things like, oh, I don't know, invite my wife to come along, who's somebody they really needed to be selling on moving into the Midwest. They did not drive me around and show me housing stock and express to me why I want to live in their community. They didn't do things like that. And therefore, I didn't even bother to submit my letters of support, for example. It just wasn't a good fit. If they didn't want me enough to show that they were hunting for me, I wasn't going to take the job. So that's a myth. The person who's hired for the job is always the most qualified for the job. Myth or fact? This is truly a myth. I've said in other lectures what I call the Peter principle, where everybody rises to their own level of incompetence, or worse still, the Paul principle, where people are hired because they don't know what they're doing. In many instances, and good instances, by the way, you might be hired into a job that you have to grow into. And we've talked about managing up and working with a boss. What are the things that we need to do to grow into any sort of job? And you may not be the most qualified, but you may also have the most potential. And I think that's something you want to sell on whenever you can, that not only am I good and likely to succeed, but I'm also likely to grow in this job and make things better for you. Myth or fact, networking is easy. And most do it easily. This is clearly a myth. Networking is not like exercise, eating healthy, or praying. Networking is something you need to do every day, and you need to do purposefully. I jest, but you understand what I'm saying. You really need to apply your skills to this. So what networking is not? Selling. This is not you pitching yourself to everybody who comes along. This is not purely transactional. In other words, using other people for gain. Gain is not what you're hoping to do. It's also not coercion. And I see a fair amount of this. And in some ways, I would tell you LinkedIn is having some issues these days where people are trying to coerce us into activities that are not helpful. It's also not putting people on the spot. It's about building relationships. You shouldn't be putting people into an uncomfortable position when you make the ask. And it's also not badgering. So the people taking this class are largely in the business school. And there are a few things I call them abuses, but they're things people do wrong routinely. The first one is pacing. Again, we're talking about relationships. And this is how often and at what pace do you touch people, not literally, but metaphorically, in order to build a relationship. And in order to sensitize somebody, even to our existence, probably takes 3 or 4 interactions. In other words, until I've met you 3 or 4 times, chances are I'm really not making the face to the name, understanding who you are, and even starting to put you into who are you relative to me. So think about that. If you're at 3 or 4 times meeting a person before you even have the most basic level of interaction, what does that say about pacing? So you need to figure out ways to get into people's schedule that is meaningful. People that we need stuff from, and these are employers and other people, recognize when we're not managing our part of the process effectively. And the last thing I'm going to talk about in this slide is email informality. I'm very purposeful in my emails. I treat them as letters, as if I were on Bridgerton or some Victorian masterpiece. I say, dear such and such, and address them by their last name. And in the business school, for example, today I wrote a letter to my dean, Dr. Wasco, Dr. Molly Wasco, and Dr. Wasco and I are actually good friends. But when I sent the email, because I don't know who else is going to read it, I addressed her as Dear Dean Wasco, thank you for your support on my project. Your input was really helpful in getting the project to the next phase, and those sorts of things. Again, always thinking, what if somebody else were to read an email? So networking facts. The first thing I'm going to talk about is a referral. Being introduced, asking somebody to introduce you to somebody else is absolutely critical. Referrals are 80% more effective than cold calls. And this kind of goes back to the sales and marketing fields, but being referred to somebody else by a constituent is the best thing that can happen. Again, in academia, when we go out and do fundraising, the best fundraisers in order aren't the deans and aren't the faculty. The best fundraisers are other people who've donated to the institution. If somebody who's donated to UAB or some other place were to go and ask somebody to donate, that's much more powerful. They have a story to tell. The next most powerful group is actually the beneficiary, the students. Having students ask for donations is the next best thing. The third is faculty who are doing research and it supports their academic and intellectual endeavor. And the last people, believe it or not, are deans and presidents. They're terrible at it. And this is who matters, who's asking, and making sure that your referrals work. The other thing is to think about, we used to talk about Rolodex. For those of you young, a Rolodex is essentially a card wheel, and people used to collect cards and put them in the Rolodex. And think about everybody you meet has 250 people you might want to meet. The other part is, if you really want a job, 70% of them are through networking. This is not going on the cold call. The other part is, what is the extent of your network? Someone you want to meet is only 4 or 5 people away. And this is where tools like LinkedIn allow you to daisy chain the referral network in ways that can be very powerful, and you should take advantage of that. So the most powerful thing you can do in many relationships is actually ask for a favor. If you ask somebody to do you a favor and it's something they can do readily and at low cost, believe it or not, they now actually feel like not only did they do you a favor, they actually feel like they owe you something. It's a very strange intellectual phenomena. But asking people for favors And asking people for help is very, very powerful. It ties them to us in ways that normal things don't. People want to be wanted. People want to feel useful, want to feel like what they do matters. And nothing is more validating than being able to fulfill a favor. And I strongly recommend that you ask people for assistance. The other things it does, as you can see from the slide, is indicate that you are self-aware and self-strong, or have self-esteem, and that you're willing to do things. You're also committed to team types of goals. You're willing to learn, etc. The fact of the matter is we're social creatures. The difference between human beings and other great apes, lemurs, raccoons, other animals that are fairly intelligent and social, is that we network in ways where we reciprocate, but don't necessarily reciprocate on a strict quid pro quo. Quid pro quo was a one thing for another. In other words, we can reciprocate and not always expect immediate return. And that's what networking is in the short. It matters. Another strange phenomena, those people who are better networked tend to have greater job security. It's very hard to fire the most popular person in the workplace. All right. So the other part I mentioned here earlier, and I'll come back to it repeatedly in this lecture, is reciprocation. Try to give, try to do things for people that matter. They'll value it greatly. And in the same way that when they do something for you, they value it. It's something we used to call idiosyncratic credits or social credits. It's worth doing it. Be a giver. It always comes back to you more than you can give out. So the fact of the matter is the best jobs never make the marketplace. They're either internal hires, which is the easy one to understand, or they come through some other mechanism where they don't actually hit the job boards. Strictly speaking, this is somewhat illegal. Most jobs, particularly public institutions, for example, are supposed to be posted, but that simply is not the way it happens. The best jobs will come to you through your social network. People will say, hey, I know somebody that's good for this, and they will come seek you rather than you applying. Think about this for just a moment. Being sought after rather than going asking is a far different position. You want to be sought. It gives you far greater leverage. So there's an exercise. You can go ahead and draw your social network, and it's worth doing. Who are you? Who are the alumni in our organization? And this is something my institution, for example, ought to be doing more actively, is putting you in with mentors that come from our institution. There's a reason that everybody on the Supreme Court of the United States went to Harvard or Yale. It's a network. And the fact of the matter is Stanford, Berkeley, Chicago, there are tons of universities that are producing plenty of good constitutional lawyers. But the fact of the matter is those people who went to Harvard, let's call it what it is, get all the good clerkships. They feed their own system. And if you didn't go there, you ain't getting in. It's sad. Past employers, good relationships with those. Professional associations can be very powerful. It's worth joining and doing the things necessary to make those relationships work, and even your friends. So I've actually given you the hierarchy here. The most effective networking occurs one-on-one at the coffee shop. And I've met many of you at the coffee shop, or on the phone, or in person in my office, whatever it is. One-on-one meetings are always better. The next best thing is group staged events. Again, this would be meetings, conferences, other sorts of stuff. One thing that's sort of fallen by the wayside in the modern age is the telephone call. And I think you might be surprised, especially depending upon the generation of the person you're trying to network with, the power of a telephone conversation. Voicemail, voicemail. Voicemail's tricky these days. To be honest, even when I have a telephone conversation, I normally text the person ahead of time and say, do you have a moment to talk? I have a couple of quick questions. And then I engage in the telephone conversation. I don't generally use voicemail any longer, except with my parents, who seem to value it for some reason I can't quite fathom. Snail mail, or the traditional letter. Again, do not underestimate this. Having a nice set of cards, putting a stamp, a real stamp, on it and sending a personal letter of thanks will move many people in ways that you'll be surprised about. And they're both age and gender differences with respect to this. Again, older people, people my age, I love to get a good card. And frankly, I like looking at the stamp, those sorts of things. And it means a lot to me. And when they do it, invariably, for example, I had a student from my days at Johns Hopkins who sent me a card thanking me for helping him with his resume. And I said, oh, I picked up the phone, let's go to dinner. And so now I'm taking his wife and my wife to Bottega. So he's making out well for want of a card. It made me feel good. It made me pick up the phone. It made me do the things that he actually wants out of life, which is to have an older mentor, somebody to help him with. Email. Be very careful with email. My advice is use it as sparingly as humanly possible. It's currently an overload. If your email comes in and people know it matters, that's a good thing. Spamming them day in and day out, as many people are doing in our workplace, not good. So let's talk about it. What stops people from networking and doing it effectively? Well, the first thing is to establish relationships. And I think this is the part where you have to have a philosophical discussion with yourself is, does this make me happy? And this is one of the big questions in this class. And in many of the things I'm doing with this Life by Design is, are these relationships with these people making me better off? Do they make me happy? And I think they will if you get the right people. And it'll also pull you in the right direction career-wise. It'll also create the research and career, again, unadvertised jobs, and they'll tell you, by the way, so now we're getting into the nitty-gritty as we learn down, lead down the line, they'll tell you what you need to say to get the job and what that is. And by the way, if what they tell you you need to say isn't what you want to do, that gives you a pretty good indication about where you are with wanting that job. All right. So other purposes for networking, gaining information. You really want to be on the pulse of what's happening in your field. What matters today? What are the careers? How are the careers changing? And they are. What do I need to do by way of research, etc.? So I won't belabor that. I've talked about this in passing. I think at this point, most of you should be looking for the jobs and doing the interviewing, not being the interviewed, given it's back and forth, and you do want to interview well and appear to want to meet their needs. With that said, in a perfect world, you should be looking for the job, not the other way around. Let's see, I've covered most of that. So planning to network. This is the other part. I don't think most of us do this actively enough. We're not planning our networks. You really need to think about it as, am I doing this 1, 2, 3, 4 times a week? It's worse to have a LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook account that is neglected than to have no LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook account at all. If you're not going to attend to it, shut it down. That's fine. You don't have to be on all those social media, but the ones you are on, you need to be proactive when you are on them. All right, so a few slides there. Again, a lot of the point of this is to make sure that our next job is the right job. There are lots of tools for researching employers. I recommend many of these. Reach out to people you know. Start to track, and there are tools for this is available as well. Track your social media. I would actually set out a schedule. I think I've got one here. Hold on. Managing your network. I would actually create a spreadsheet, and I do create a spreadsheet. And there are people, I have a friend named Nir Menikemi who jokes about that I call him on the third Thursday of every month, and that it's a standing meeting, and that it's part of my social networking sort of activity. You should do that too. It's okay to be predictable, by the way, particularly with people that are mentors or peers. Oh, somebody on one of the discussion boards mentioned John Maxwell. John Maxwell does a lot of work on leadership, and he had a 2-podcast series on John Wooden, who was a basketball coach at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. And he talked about mentoring, networking, and interacting with people. And it was really quite a good podcast. I recommend it if you're out there. The other part is these follow-up dates and thinking about things that you're going to say back to them. And in this podcast, I'm thinking about one of the things John Wooden demanded of the people he mentored was that they would bring back information on how they'd acted on the advice they'd been given. So they were good networkers. I've talked about the professional pitch. You should have your elevator talk. Here's some of the simple things. I won't belabor this. Asking people meaningful questions about themselves. The best job interviews and the job interviews where I'm absolutely certain I'm getting an offer are the ones where the other person talks 80% of the time and they're largely telling me their story. And think about it this way: when are we happiest? Well, we're happiest when we're telling you good things about ourselves. So if I'm in a job interview and the person who's making the decision about offering me a job just spent 40 minutes out of 45 describing how much they love their company, how happy they are, and how successful they've been, chances are that is reflecting onto me. Learn how to ask the questions that keep the other person talking and keep them on point. LinkedIn. So I mentioned this a few times. LinkedIn is a thing. And I don't know how you can get away from it. I would recommend very strongly that everybody go do a LinkedIn audit, that they look at their current profile, make sure that all their educational and employment information is up to date. I would also ask for referrals from people who know me about my skill set, because believe it or not, people are using LinkedIn a great deal to look for and screen people. And I would do a LinkedIn audit. It's huge. There's 500,000, or there's 500 million professionals. This is out of date. And there's thousands of university groups. So this slide's woefully, this is 2013. So bring it up a decade and triple everything, and the numbers are probably right. Get a professional photo. It's worth having good headshots. Highlighting your career, keyword-rich summary. Make sure you're tagged every which way. Include your volunteer and extracurricular activities. And again, this thing about recommendations cannot be understated. So the last thing I'll talk about is fear. What is fear? Well, fear is an acronym, and it stands for false evidence appearing real. You should not have fear. Most of our fears are largely unfounded. And what is it when it comes to networking that we fear? Well, we fear rejection or failure. We don't want to seem stupid in the eyes of people that we like or want to be like. We don't want to feel like we're taking up other people's time. That's not good. We don't want to make negative impressions, etc. Those are all things not to worry about. What happens, happens. It's just the way of the world. This goes to one other set of beliefs. There are people who are naturally good networkers, people who remember every name, connect with people in extraordinary ways. I happen to be German, and I have an uncle named Bobby who was from Germany and born and lived his entire life in Germany. And Bobby was a 5'5" man with a bad complexion and balding, as you can probably imagine, and not particularly handsome on any dimension. But Bobby spoke 5 or 6 languages, leaned in, dressed confidently, always had a light for a cigarette. That tells you what era we're talking about. But he was the nicest man, and he was a natural networker. He was the consummate, what we would call European. There was nowhere you couldn't go that Bobby didn't have a story, and that he didn't connect with you and could say something about your hometown, or how much he'd enjoyed being in your hometown on his youthful travels, et cetera, et cetera. And he probably happened to know the friend up the block that you knew. Yes, there are people like that, and they're rare, though. The fact of the matter is, most people are like myself, where this is a bit of a struggle. It's a stressor. We're drained a little bit at the end of the experience, but it's something that's worth doing. And it's also a matter of what we call resilience. As you do it more and more, you build up, and it becomes pleasant. And it's a good thing to do. Networking is something you should be very, very, very proactive about. If it's not something you do day in and day out, then you're doing it wrong. And I'll leave it at that. All right. So in a future lecture, I will talk about hiring others and why networking is so important for that. At this point in my career, I never put out a job announcement. If I can't find somebody through my network, then something's gone horribly wrong. That's it. I'll stop there. Thank you very much. Any questions? Well, thank you. By the way, so one thing I think, especially for those of you who are here today, we'll try to get things going, and I think everybody should make the connection through LinkedIn with our classmates. So as you go onto the discussion boards and you see people posting up things that are of interest to you. If you'd reach out to them through LinkedIn, I think that would be a really great activity, and I'd like to see more of that. And oh, by the way, please feel free to reach out to me through LinkedIn. I'm always happy to have more good contacts and be on the hunt for good employees. Well, thank you and good night.